Considering the two hottest young talents in modern F1, Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc effectively removed themselves from the silly season by signing multi-year extensions in late 2019, it is remarkable how much driver market upheaval 2020 has brought. Of the 7 top teams in the 2020 Constructors Championship, 6 will go into the upcoming 2021 campaign with a different lineup, and the 7th, Mercedes, could yet join them, though probably won't. But it's not as if the driver market has been massively stagnant in the years prior, especially for the youth. Arguably most of the breakout F1 drivers from recent years have either already had a go at race-winning machinery or are on a clear path at a genuine top team. Carlos Sainz Jr. and Esteban Ocon are your 2 potential exceptions, but at least Ferrari was still viewed as a front-running F1 team when Sainz was signing for it, and Ocon had previously been figured as a genuine contender for a Mercedes F1 drive. Yet, the 3rd exception, Sainz's now ex-teammate Lando Norris, stands alone. The driver, who stood as the absolute hottest property on the market during his time in junior racing, has not really sniffed at free agency in F1, at least publicly. He has been synonymous with McLaren and McLaren alone since his Grand Prix debut, has not flirted his eyelashes at any other team, and has not been linked to a move away. So should Lando believe so much in McLaren? He came in on a multi-year deal and signed a multi-year extension midway through his rookie season. This would have already taken him beyond the original 2021 date for the new technical regulations, but even though these are not coming in 2022, it seems Norris would not be on the market that year either, his extension having been reported by The Guardian as being through 2022. If true, that's serious commitment, especially to a team that has not won a race since 2012, and while admittedly, this did not deter Daniel Ricciardo in signing a 2-year deal, this only happened after Ricciardo was passed by for the Ferrari seat by Carlos Sainz, whereas for Norris, no alternate options have been seriously reported. So isn't this in some ways peculiar? Are the absolute top teams, none of which are immune from needing to future-proof their lineups, just not interested or convinced? Or has he removed himself from the market before they could even come calling? And if so, is Norris right to be this sold on McLaren's ultimate potential? This may be a bit disrespectful to McLaren as a brand, and especially to the new look team that has been so carefully assembled under Andres Seidel at Woking. So for the avoidance of doubt, the point here isn't that McLaren won't be a good place to call home in 2021. In fact, all the signs point at the opposite. Since Norris's arrival, McLaren has managed 2 magnificent seasons, on both occasions snatching the absolute best constructors result it could. There's a clear consensus that his 2020 car was not the 3rd fastest on the grid, and yet McLaren finished 3rd anyway, despite not exactly having a perfect reliability record. It also saw off its engine supplier's works team in the last 2 seasons, despite Renault showing up to the party with pretty credible driver lineups on both occasions. Granted, the switch to Mercedes will provide a much tougher benchmark in that regard, but it's also likely to pay off in outright competitiveness. In other words, it's, all in all, a pretty good place to be for your average or above average F1 driver. But is that all Norris is for now, or can he already aim higher? Seidel estimated McLaren should only be regularly fighting for wins come 2023. It's a conservative but realistic look at things, and if Norris has indeed signed through 2022, he will have been aware all the way through that he's unlikely to end up in truly front-running machinery until that deal runs its course. And in a sense, that's fine, he's young enough to wait, but in a different sense, that's a very good chance that by then, the likes of Verstappen, Leclerc, and George Russell, effectively his peers, will be fighting for the F1 title. The fact that Norris doesn't have as clear a path to that F1 title harkens back to his pre-F1 decision to join McLaren's junior program in early 2017. At that point, he was already a karting world champion, a British F4 champion, a Toyota Racing Series champion, and a champion in 2 separate Formula Renault 2.0 categories. All of that came with the benefit of substantial backing and top machinery, but those results are impossible to ignore whatever the circumstances. Simply put, it's hard to imagine that there is any F1 junior program worth its salt that wouldn't welcome him with open arms. And indeed, Norris acknowledged he had talks with Mercedes, Red Bull, Renault, only for McLaren's offering to trump all three. The decision to join forces with McLaren proved to be an objectively solid one. He got an F1 seat at basically the first available opportunity in 2019. There was no public pressure from Norris to do so, but BBC did report an approach from Toro Rosso and McLaren made it clear that was part of his thinking. And McLaren has now made him an F1 podium finisher, a milestone the vast majority of aspiring racers never even get close to. But if you look back at his big decision, it's easy to imagine ways in which he could have been even better off. But there's an entirely different possibility, of course, that Norris's lack of links to other teams isn't just because of his tight connections and long-term deal with McLaren, but because the top F1 teams aren't fully convinced of his potential to be the absolute cream of the crop. Norris has been tough to benchmark in his time in F1 so far. We can presume from the mere fact of his 2019 promotion that he stacked up well against Stoffel Van Dorn and even Fernando Alonso in his FP1 appearances the year prior. But since then, Sainz has been the only available reference point. Much has been made of the evenly matched driver lineup being a trump card that propelled McLaren to its two B-Class championship triumphs of 2019 and 2020, and though Sainz's tally alone would have been enough to give it fourth place in the former, it is accurate that Norris came up being in sync of Racing Point and Renault last year. Sainz comfortably led the team in scoring in the 2 years as teammates, which perhaps isn't an argument in Norris's favor, for the Spaniard, as effectively and entertaining as is proven in numerous races of his Grand Prix career, was earlier seen as disposable by the likes of Renault and Red Bull. And though those decisions may feel a bit dubious in hindsight, they highlight Sainz not being viewed as a top-tier Grand Prix driver, but rather just a really good one. And Norris gave him a bit of a headache right away, particularly over one lap. There has been very little to split the two in pre-race sessions in their two campaigns together at McLaren, with only Sainz's 2019 practice advantage registering as particularly significant and probably largely explainable by Norris having to come to grips with circuits that have not featured much in his junior career. Otherwise, they have largely gone blow for blow, whether in practice, which despite the noise of different run plans, a lack of focus on lap time can still be quite indicative of outright pace, or qualifying, and that reflects very well on Norris. But there are two things that don't reflect so well. The first one is that there is no clear upward trend for Norris in his head-to-head with Sainz over one lap, as evidenced by 5 consecutive qualifying defeats in the middle of 2020. It's hard to say that he really tipped the scales in his favor. And though in race trim, 2020 spec Norris was clearly closer to Sainz than in 2019, he also started from further back, and Sainz still came across as the more assured and incisive Sunday performer. There are plenty of hybrid era examples of F1's new faces, your rookies and sophomores being paired up with an experienced operator. In fact, it's probably the model lineup. And while that's been the death knell of some F1 careers, see Stoffel Van Dorn facing Fernando Alonso at McLaren or Jolyon Palmer being taken apart by Nico Hülkenberg at Renault, it's also contributed to some drivers' speedy ascent to relevance. What Norris has done in F1 so far isn't quite as impressive. His most obvious parallel is Esteban Ocon and his time at Force India, matching and even beating the experienced Sergio Perez in qualifying, but being second best in race trim. Ocon's reputation, of course, has now taken a hit due to Daniel Ricciardo's head-to-head, and it is entirely possible that Norris might be in for the same experience in 2021. Now, if he is somehow available for 2022 and goes decently well against Ricciardo, the two hybrid era heavyweights should give Norris some serious thought, and not just because his junior career and F1 career so far suggests a massive upside, but because there's a good chance he's still nowhere near his peak version. After all, this year, Norris will still be the second youngest driver on the grid, beaten by only Yuki Tsunoda, and if age is just a number, there's also the fact he's still a relatively newcomer by F1 standards to Formula racing. Russell, Verstappen and Leclerc have all already proven to varying degrees that they can run up front in F1. Norris hasn't had the chance yet, and if he stays at McLaren for the next 2 years, chances are he'll have to wait a while longer. At the same time, there's reason to believe McLaren will reach those heights again eventually. Maybe Norris just wants to be there when it happens. And that's been it for this video. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. Apart from that, I hope you're an awesome day, and bye bye.